Chapter 3. Monkey Business. I couldn't see anything, but I felt confusion in the air as everyone stopped and started looking around. We could hear something unidentifiable, and it was growing louder. A few moments passed before the lull was broken by the screech of a monkey. Everyone jumped with surprise as monkeys wielding weapons descended from the trees like falling stars, screeching as they fell but righting themselves and landing with grace. I heard a particularly large monkey land close by, and I finally managed to open my eyes and see again. "You people and your men need to leave. You're not welcome in our forest," the large one said. She was probably about a half a meter shorter than me and stood fully upright with a very human build. She was wielding a simple wooden bow staff and wore a somewhat fancy red silken garb that had thin white lines running through the top and evoked images of snow and was decorated with flowers, along with a pair of dull yellow pants, no shoes, and a silken red cap. The monkeys with her wore much more sparse clothing or armor pieces. "Yeah, like a bunch of monkeys are really gonna stop us," Liu said with a chuckle. The monkey girl turned to him and pointed her staff. She asked, "Are you in charge here?" And he nodded in response. "Prepare yourself!" she shouted, and he took up a defensive stance as he pulled out his glaive. The girl launched herself at him before batting his glaive aside with her staff and landing a devastating kick to his face, sending him crashing through the dirt until he slammed into a tree and smashed through it, sliding to a stop in the grass. Lin Yu took her attention off me and approached before she said, "I like you, monkey girl. What's your name?" She put her hands on her hips and smiled brightly. "I'm Sun Shenzhen Ren, the one and only daughter of Sun Wukong," she introduced proudly. Lin Yu seemed intrigued. "Interesting. First a Greek and now a Chinese demigod. Today has been quite eventful," she said. You know I'm a demigod?" I asked. Ren seemed like she hadn't recognized what Lin Yu had been saying because her mouth dropped open in surprise at my question. Lin Yu looked back at me and said, "I am the last blade of Ming Song. I know more about your kind than you probably ever will." I got up and electrified what was left of my blade, hoping Ren and her monkey army might help me turn the tables. I glanced back at Zhao to see him slowly dragging himself away before putting my full attention on Lin Yu. One of the soldiers fired at one of the monkeys and suddenly the entire battlefield was in chaos, but it felt like the only ones standing on it were Lin Yu, Ren, and I. Ren took up a defensive stance as Lin Yu moved with purpose. I could feel her intent to kill as she slashed at Ren's throat so quickly she didn't even seem to see it coming. I moved to intervene, but was absolutely aghast when I heard the clang of metal striking stone. It was as if he appeared out of nowhere. Standing there, defending Ren, was a much larger monkey man, wielding a stone cudgel and wearing only a pair of red pants, a golden belt, and red pointed shoes. His fur was spiky on top, and he had a fuzzy beard that added a point to his chin. He had a glowing red aura surrounding him. It was thin, bright, and outlined his entire body in brilliant red that matched his eyes, making the edges of his brown fur slightly pink. He blocked Lin Yu's strike effortlessly as his burning red eyes stared furiously into hers. "Didn't you hear her? You aren't welcome here," the monkey man said sternly. Lin Yu seemed like she was about to respond, but before she could, he punched her so hard in the face that she crashed through 3 trees before bouncing to a violent stop in the dirt. The men saw their leaders were down and routed, leaving them to their fate. Sun just stood there, staring at Lin Yu in the dirt with intensity in his eyes. She scrambled to get to her feet as her light grew brighter, and I was surprised by her brother's speed as he ran entirely around the battlefield to join her side. "Are you all right, Lin Yu?" "I'll be fine. That one there in the center. He's Sun Wukong," she replied. Her blade was trembling, and I saw true hatred in her eyes as her brother looked to him in surprise. Sun adjusted his posture, putting his back straight and leaning his head back slightly as he relaxed, closed his eyes, and lowered his staff. I was surprised by the juxtaposition in his demeanor when he opened his eyes and pointed at her. "I'm glad you remember me, but know this, Ming Song Lin Yu. I know who you are too. And if you want to remain the last blade of Ming Song, you'll keep your filthy troops out of our forest. The goal of your family is not what you think it is. Your father's ambitions will bring death and disaster to our entire country, so if you know what's good for you, you'll never show your face around here again," Sun threatened. "Ruin? To our whole country? Really?" Ren asked under her breath, making most of the monkeys start to question it as well. Everyone was surprised when Lin Yu didn't respond. Everyone except Sun, anyway. "What are you waiting for? Are you going to leave, or have you chosen this place as your grave?" he asked furiously. Lin Yu started to step forward, but Liu grabbed her elbow. Let's retreat for now. The first part of our mission was a success. Besides, Father will want to hear the news, he pleaded. She seemed upset, but decided to listen to her brother, sheathing her blade. She pointed a finger at Sun and said, "This isn't over. Not by a long shot." And with that, she and her brother left on foot, simply walking away. I expected as much, Sun replied with his nose crinkled by his anger. With a flick of his wrist, he shrunk his cudgel down to the size of a needle and tucked it behind his ear, putting his hands on his hips and staring after them, a disapproving, angry expression on his face. "Dad, we can't really just let them get away, can we?" Rana asked, taking his attention. "Young lady, I told you to stay out of this," Sun said, shouting at his daughter. She started to argue, but he cut her off. "Ren, get back home this instant. It's too dangerous for you to be out here," he insisted. Ren tried to argue, but he pointed in the direction of their home and said, "March!" Reluctantly, she decided to heed her father's wishes. Just as she started off, a large group of monkeys came from elsewhere in the forest. Some monkeys were carrying dizzy, disoriented soldiers over their shoulders, and they were leading groups of people. The civilians were literally chained together. They had shackles on their wrists, necks, and ankles, with chains that tied around their waists and connected to the person behind them. And they were all wearing normal and largely undamaged attire. Some wore work clothes, some in more comfortable clothing. But a handful of them looked ill. They were holding their stomachs and had pained looks in their eyes. One vomited violently, causing the whole chain to stop and squirm in disgust and discomfort. "Son, we found these townsfolk not far away. Some of them are sick. We think they've been poisoned," one monkey said, carrying a wicker basket. Just from looking inside, I could already tell, but I reached inside and pulled one out to examine it anyway. "Monkshood," I said, gently turning the plant between my fingers. The monkey tried to snatch it from me, but I held it too high for him to reach. "If you know what that is, then you know just how dangerous it is to hold it," the monkey protested. "That's enough, you. He can't be poisoned by it," Sun explained for me. After a moment, I returned the plant to its basket before wiping my hands through the dirt to make sure I didn't leave any traces of the monkshood on them. After dusting off my hands, I said, "They're gathering monkshood, so that means two things. Number one is they have someone they intend to poison." "That's right. But what's number two?" Few asked with a curious curl of his tail. "It means these people they're using. They intended to let them die to gather it for them," I explained. Few went wide-eyed with shock. "I don't know if that makes them cunning or evil," Sun grimly remarked. "Sounds like both to me," I replied. Sun nodded as he looked down to me, but then he seemed struck before he offered a quick bow. "Thanks for your help back there. I'm Sun Wukong. Nice to meet you," he said with a cheeky grin. I returned his bow and gave him a wave as I introduced myself. "You too. My name's Damon of Athens. I've been looking for you for quite a while, but it seems you've been kept plenty busy," I said. Sun pointed to his own chest with a surprised look when I told him I'd been seeking him out. "Looking for me? Oh no, not another one looking for those dragons' treasures again. Listen, kid, those books didn't tell you the real story. Pigsy made most of it up. There aren't any treasures that can grant wishes, okay?" Sun insisted. I wasn't really sure what he was talking about. I don't know about any of that. I'm here because my pantheon needs help from the Chinese gods," I explained. Sun seemed both greatly surprised and intrigued. He put a hand on his chin, and I was suddenly very aware of his intense focus as his eyes scanned me up and down. "You need help, huh? With what exactly?" "It's pretty rare for any pantheon to ask for help," he said. "We're trying to gather an army of the gods to fight chaos and stop him from creating chimeras and desecrating the Egyptian tombs," I explained. Sun actually looked very surprised, but then his surprise was replaced by intrigue. "Really? Now that's someone I'd love to have a crack at. When are we planning for this skirmish?" "It's set to take place near the next summer solstice," I said. Sun pumped a fist. "Really? All right! You can count me in," Sun said with enthusiasm. "Just like that?" I asked. He seemed baffled at my question, but it was clear he simply didn't understand. I decided to run with it and offered a deep bow of appreciation. "Thank you very much, but if I could ask a favor, could you help me get in touch with the rest of your pantheon so I could ask for their help as well?" I asked, unbending from my honorable bow. He seemed a bit dumbstruck, but when I peeked up at him, he was smiling down at me. I pulled up from my bow as he put his hand on my head and ruffled my hair. It was annoying, so I tried batting his arm away, but he was so fast I couldn't even touch him. "Ha ha ha! I like you, Damon. Tell you what, come with us and help these villagers get back home safely, and then I'll take you up to heaven so you can ask the Jade Emperor and the others for help." but I think I'll just bring you up to the gates. They don't like me very much up there." Sun chuckled, scratching the back of his head. I nodded to him and said, "That sounds fine. Thank you very much." Without skipping a beat, Sun changed gears. "Everyone, let's grab a human and run them along to the village. Smaller monkeys stay behind and keep the guards who aren't sick in line. Damon, let's carry as many as we can," he ordered. I sheathed what was left of my sword and prepared myself for some exercise. "Right," I agreed. But before I could actually grab any, Sun moved like a streak of light and gathered up somewhere around 70 of the 100 or so villagers and took off toward town like a rocket. I decided to follow suit and grabbed up all the rest before dashing off after him. I couldn't believe the monkeys could keep up with me, because I sure couldn't keep up with Sun. It took me about 5 minutes to clear the forest, crest the hill, and make my way down into town. It was easy to find Sun and the others with all the commotion. He was giving out instructions and had already begun an effort to make the sick comfortable and start a head count. I had to admit I respected it. Sun directed me on where to set down the ill folk I was carrying before returning to Few, the aged monkey who spoke before. "Few, take over and help the people figure out how to solve this. As for the rest of you, wait for Few's instruction, but we need to return to the forest and protect the entrance." "Let's step lively now," Sun said with a wave of his arm. The monkeys moved into action like perfectly trained soldiers, lining up and allowing Few to give orders before following the direction of Sun himself. Few pulled a handful, but then he bid the rest of them farewell. The monkeys dashed up the hill before disappearing from sight completely. Sun turned to me with his hands on his hips. He asked, "Ready, young man?" with a cheeky grin. I nodded, and before I could do or say anything else, Sun grabbed me by the arm and started hoisting me up into the air.